Do you want to signal me, Chris, when people are in and we can start?
Yeah, looks like everybody is in joining. There's nobody else in the waiting room, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready when you are. Good morning. My name is Monica Sargent. I'm the lead educational counselor with the Educational Opportunity Center program at Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. This month marks 44 years that I've worked in TRIO programs in Vermont. So both by the extent of my experience and age and whatever else you want to factor in, I've become a bit of a TRIO historian. And so today's presentation follows a number of TRIO Zoom rooms that our program has initiated since July to mainly reach students and agency and college partners. But today we've taken a different approach. We're reaching out to our TRIO community, both at VSAC throughout Vermont and also within our New England Educational Opportunity Association. Next slide. So after the final cabinet meeting before John F. Kennedy went to Dallas, this word was found circled at the end of the president's notes by his brother, Robert: poverty. And the initiatives that followed to address poverty were part of LBJ's administration. Next slide. And so this started back in the 1960s with the Economic Opportunity Act, which established the Office of Economic Opportunity as part of the War on Poverty statute. Next slide. And the first TRIO program to appear was the Upward Bound program. And initially there were pilot programs funded, and I learned years later when I started with Upward Bound at Linden that there had been a pilot project at St. Johnsbury Academy as part of that original initiative. And this was with Sargent Shriver as director. If you recall, Sargent Shriver was the brother-in-law of President Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The Higher Education Act of 1965 established the Educational Opportunity Grant. So there would be some funding to support access to higher education. Next slide. And so soon after that, the talent search programs appeared, and they were different in design than Upward Bound, but they were still targeted toward youth and their access to higher education. And in '68, the higher education was reauthorized for the first time. Next slide. So now we've got programs, two programs bringing youth into higher education, Upward Bound and Talent Search. And so it made sense to develop a program that would serve those same students in their success in college. And that originally was called Special Services for Disadvantaged Students, what's now called Student Support Services. But that came into being in college campuses in 1968, providing tutoring, supplemental instruction, additional advising, and more recently, even some scholarship money to participating students. So together, Upward Bound, Talent Search, and Student Support Services formed this trio of federal programs, and that's where the name actually originated. It's not an acronym. It was about these three original programs. Next. So the 70s saw an expansion of additional programs, first being the Educational Opportunity Center programs, like the one that I work in here in Vermont, to help adults access higher education. And in the early 70s, there was really an emergence of this adult student population, people who were going back to college, who might have left a degree incomplete, people who were starting college and juggling families and work. And so in response, the Educational Opportunity Center program was established to assist with that transition for adult students. Also in the early 70s, veterans were returning from Vietnam. Some had educational money to spend. And so another program to support their academic transition to college was established, the Veterans Upward Bound program, which of course still exists on many college campuses. So people who worked in these programs, based on the goals of the programs, the populations that were served, and the competitive grant writing that allowed programs to get established and continue, had their own professional development needs, so that funding was added in 1976 to add training programs for staff and leadership by establishing a training authority. Okay. And in the 80s, we became more permanent as programs nationally. And that was with the reauthorization and two key concepts that continue to be a foundation of TRIO programs today. One being, we serve first generation college students. And that allowed us to establish a broad political coalition in Congress, where there really are still many people who like us are, like TRIO students, are first generation in their family to go to college. And we also establish prior experience, so that continuing programs, when they meet their goals and objectives in that competitive grant process, gain as much as an additional 15 points in the competition. And that, of course, has allowed programs to be stable over time. Okay. So now we've got students who we've brought into college. We've got students who we're retaining in college. And certainly some of those students aspire to go on to graduate and professional school. And with that was what evolved was the Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program, named in memory of the Challenger astronaut Ronald E. McNair, who had been an upward bound student in his youth. And with the emergence of STEM studies, we also developed regional upward bound math science programs that were, they were still working with youth, but they had a concentration in their curriculum on math and science. Next slide. So not until 1992 were the TRIO programs put into law. And at that time, the name changed from Special Programs for Students from Disadvantaged Backgrounds to Federal TRIO programs. And my personal memory about that disadvantage notion has to do with recruiting at Cabot High School, and having a mom say to me, I'm happy to have my daughter participate in this program, but I don't really like this disadvantage term. And so I eliminated it from my presentations from then on out, because I thought she had a good point. Next slide. Okay, appropriations. So this is where we stand with money today. And of course, this is quite an evolution. We hit the $1 billion mark in appropriations, within the last couple of years. So, and this also speaks to nationally, that we are a national movement. We're not just a Vermont or New England or VSAC or any smaller entity, but we're all part of this big national movement of TRIO programs. And currently we have 967 upward bound programs serving over 91,000 students. They have an appropriation of $355.6 million, and their cost per participant is over $5,000. But of course, most really upward bound programs have the summer residential component, which really does drive up that cost. And of course, in comparison, Talent Search serves many more students at a much reduced rate. There are 473 programs currently serving nearly 310,000 students with an appropriation of $179.8 million and a cost of $580 per participant. Student support service programs recently just finished awarding after a competition. There's currently 1,066 programs serving over 200,000 students at a cost with an appropriation of $337.1 million and a per participant cost of $1,667. And I'm a bargain hunter by nature, so I'm very happy to work in the EOC program, where our per participant cost is the lowest among the TRIO programs at $280. $280 per participant. We have 140 programs nationally serving over 193,000 students with an appropriation of $54.1 million. Next slide, please. McNair program. So we have 187 in the country, serving over 5,000 students with a $50 million appropriation. And the cost per participant there is again high, but students do have an internship and are paid a helpful stipend during that. So that brings up the cost there. Upward Bound Math Science, there are 212 projects serving 13,000 plus participants with an appropriation of $63.52 million and a $44,818 per participant cost. Nationally, we have 62 Veterans Upward Bound projects serving 8,157 participants with an appropriation of $19.06 million and a cost of $23.37 per participant. The staff training that's available nationwide accounts for 12 awards of $3.21 million and serves around 2,700 staff at a cost of $1,194 per participant. So current totals nationally, our programs serve 823,710 students, numbering 3,107 programs with a $1.059 billion, not including the dollars set aside for staff training. But despite all that we do and all the students that we serve, we're still just meeting a very small percentage of the eligible youth and adults that could be served and that qualify for service in our programs. Next slide. So, and continue, Chris, please. So underlying these programs, and importantly, is financial aid. And in 1972, the Basic Educational Opportunity Grant was created with a, which, you know, now is, we always refer to Title IV for financial aid. And what is now known as the Pell Grant, named for the late Senator Claiborne Pell, who hailed from Newport, Rhode Island, and was a champion of first generation and low income students in TRIO. We are providing to the maximum needs student in 2021 a grant of $6,345 from the Pell Grant program. So how things were set up originally before everything was centralized at the U.S. Department of Education, there were regional offices that oversaw these programs, and that really led to, as a result of this grassroots organization regionally around the country. So, and the first association, or one of the first, was the Southwest Association, and these all have taken on a name that relates to their name as an acronym. So you'll hear this association referred to as SWASAP, followed by SAOP, the Southeastern Association of Educational Opportunity Program Personnel. Next slide. And by what I believe is still the largest association in terms of members and involved states. And President Emeritus Dr. Arnold Mitchum from the Council for Opportunity and Education and the current president, Maureen Hoyler, both hailed from Wisconsin and Marquette. And so they were involved in the establishment of the Mid-America Association. Next slide. But New England was not far behind. So originally our association was referred to as NAOP, or the New England Association of Educational Opportunity Program Personnel. It was established in New Hampshire. And in 1999, we changed our name to the New England Educational Opportunity Association, which is a little bit easier to manage. And I also want, you know, when I started with TRIO at the University of Vermont in 1976, I remember that we had a regional program manager then who was based in Boston and came to visit our program, you know, did a site visit. So, you know, I can relate to this regional organization from that earlier experience. So out in the Rockies, I guess we could say, in that part of the country, the Association of Special Programs in Region 8 was created, and that's become known as ASPIRE. So that has a very useful acronym. And in 1977, the Mid-Eastern Association of Educational Opportunity Programs Personnel was established, or MEOP, and that also includes programs in Washington, D.C. Next slide. AEEE is our neighbor in neighboring programs in New York, New Jersey. Originally included Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and that's known as AEEE. And then WestOp followed that same year and includes, you can see the states that are involved with WestOp, including Hawaii and the Pacific Territories. So at this point in time, there were 9 regional associations, and they came together and created the National Coordinating Council of Educational Opportunity Program Personnel, which has led to, you know, our national office in DC. And so there were 21 representatives who came together in New Orleans to get our national office established. Well, actually, the office followed, but the National Association was established at that point. And in 1979, the programs in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands were established established their own association, the Caribbean Association, even though they had been formerly a part of AEEE. But I think it's great that AEEE, every other year, they go to either Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands for their regional conference. You know, if you come from New York and New Jersey, that makes a lot of sense in the spring of the year. And then 1980, the Northwest Association of Special Programs, NASP, was established. So this is an old shot of the back of a COE brochure, I think, but it does show you how these 10 regional associations now exist and stack up. And so you can get a visual of that. Okay, next slide. So after this 1977 meeting in New Orleans, it took several years before the office NCEOA was incorporated and established an office in DC and held its first policy seminar. And I believe this year's policy seminar got eclipsed by COVID. So I don't even think they were able to pull it off virtually with such little notice, but Kim can maybe speak to that. Kim Jones, who's going to be joining us from the council after I'm finished here. And in 1999, the same year that our New England Association got renamed, so did the National Council of Educational Opportunity Associations became the Council for Opportunity and Education. Next slide. So in 1980, the educational amendments were rewritten into law, and TRIO moved from program providers to policymakers. There had been attempts at times to have a focus on race, ethnicity, regionalism, but these were set aside, and we embraced instead our similarities, our uniform eligibility of first-generation low-income students, our function as programs being defined, and our prior experience being added to grant competitions. Next slide. And so in 1982, NCEOA held its first annual conference in DC. I attended that conference. I was a pretty young director of Upward Bound at Linden at that point in time. And in 2020, COE held its first virtual conference, Reimagining College Opportunity, just late last month in September. Next slide. So this is kind of a historical event, I guess we could say, in our history of TRIO. And this was when, during the Reagan years, there was attempts annually to really drastically cut our funding. And it's when we began to embrace the fact that we have had then and have continued to have bipartisan support. And we were able to retain our current appropriation of that year. And Dr. Mitchum also always liked to say the next year TRIO got a $10 million apology in the way of an increase. And so that's when our grassroots advocacy and efforts were really first put to the test. Next slide. So 1985 is when National TRIO Day was established, the last Saturday in February, and we did in New England manage to squeeze in our annual TRIO Day celebration in late February this year in Framingham, Mass. Okay. And we were joined in the 90s by what was originally called the National Early Intervention Scholarship Program, or NEISP, had eligibility guidelines and services parallel to TRIO programs. And the late Senator Jim Jeffords from Vermont had a role in that original establishment and funding. Next slide. And of course, within a few years, that evolved to the Gear Up program, gaining early awareness and readiness for undergraduate programs, established with a pretty good hunk of money in the beginning, a $200 million appropriation. So it replaced what had been called NEISP, and was co-located with many TRIO programs around the country. And so we've already had leadership emerge from Gear Up programs at the state, regional level, and we've embraced them, even though they're funded in a different way. Next slide. So today, as I mentioned, we crossed that $1 billion in appropriation, and we had an increase of 30 million, and we currently stand at 1.09 billion. There have been an attempt to block grant TRIO programs under the current administration and Betsy DeVos, but hopefully that will not, after today, be a problem. So advantages of TRIO programs, there are many. And when I do this presentation with students, I always get a student to speak to these, and they do so readily, I have to tell you. And one thing is that relationship. How many students whose stories you've told have spoken about that counselor or that program director or whatever relationship they had with their TRIO program that contributed to their success? And so we do keep a student counselor ratio that makes that relationship central. And because we write to and then do our work according to specific and measurable outcome objectives, we we continue as programs by meeting those objectives. And, you know, I think in our program, our director has made a significant effort to help all of the counselors understand that and make sure that our work accomplishes those objectives so that we do retain those prior experience points in competitions. And it's not just a director's job to know that stuff. It's every counselor's job to know it and to work to achieve it. Next slide. And, you know, Upward Bound and Talent Search and really Gear Up probably more so. I've also begun to reach students in the middle grades. And so that's helped to keep many students in school as well as develop a much earlier perspective on going to college, so that when they enter high school, they already know, you know, the importance of the classes that they take and that contribution to their ability to go to college. Next slide. And the guidelines for eligibility are, you know, they're pretty modest. That's the word I use now, modest income rather than low income, and where neither parent has graduated from college. So that's always 2/3 of our participants. And even though parents lack higher education, sometimes they also don't value it. But increasingly, I find that they value it, but they really just don't know how to guide their students towards it. And so that's an important component of our work as well, is supporting parents and supporting their children and helping them make those decisions. Next slide. We build on relationships. You know, I've done this work long enough now, so I'm into my second generation of EOC participants, meaning I've helped their parents and then their parents bring them to me. So we do build relationships over time and maintain them, and I think that's important. Here's just a few, you know, descriptions of some of the population that we serve. You know, a single parent trying to juggle school and being the sole parent, particularly in this current environment where they've got kids sometimes at home learning. I can think of a guy I helped for an appeal on his grant through VSAC because he is caring for his nephew. His nephew lives with him, so he was able to count him in his family size. You know, people with disabilities, of course, can be served by student support services. They're not held strictly to the 2/3 first generation and low income. They can reach beyond that to students with disabilities. There was one young guy who spoke one time about his TRIO experience here in Vermont, and he grew up in a small town. He said where there were the how did it go? There were the have-nots and the have-a-littles. And I just thought that was so right on for describing a lot of rural towns and probably a lot of city neighborhoods. Next slide.
Run out of time.
Students get consistent attention, and it is intense. You know, I've always met for years with everybody in person up until March, and now counselors in our program are working online in Zoom and on the phone, and it's still working, even though it's a very different way of staying in touch with people. Next slide. Cultural and academic enrichment is always a part of our service delivery. Exposure to cultural events, particularly Upward Bound, I think has that with students living on campus, and that opportunity for all the summer. I remember taking students to a Romeo and Juliet at Shelburne Farms when the Shakespeare Festival was still active in this area. Next slide. Reality-based, many of the staff who serve TRIO students have overcome class, academic, social, and cultural barriers themselves to succeed in higher education. We are community-based. Marty's giving me a time signal because I got to speed up here. We are non-bureaucratic. Very few federal employees support our, to support the number of students that we're serving. And finally, our representation mirrors our multicultural and multi-ethnic society, noting that there's an equal number of African-American and white students served by TRIO program, 19% Hispanic, 4% Native American, 3% Asian American, and multicultural, multiracial students, and 7,000 students with disability and at least 6,000 veterans. And I think that might be it. Yes. So we're going to stop here because Kim's going to get into the COE goals. So next joining us is Kim Jones from the Council for Opportunity in Education. Kim's a native of New England, and she's always happy to be here both in person and virtually. She grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, graduated from Yale with a degree in political science, went on to Georgetown to earn a law degree, and is just recently promoted to Executive Vice President at the Council for Opportunity in Education. So thanks for joining us, Kim.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am just trying to get my PowerPoint together. You think I'm so busy, watching your PowerPoint, I'm not getting my stuff together, but let's see. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint? It says COE. Okay, great. So thank you, Monica. It is great to be here. As she mentioned, I am originally from Connecticut, and so NEOA, you guys are home. I was looking at the names in the participant list, and so I don't know everybody, but certainly I always consider, you all to be very special and dear to me. Almost every year I go to the Connecticut TRIO chapter meeting, and my parents usually come, and they will have lunch, come for the banquet. And everybody, sometimes people have misconceptions or preconceived notions. They think, oh, she went to Yale, she went to Georgetown, she's so fancy. But my parents come and they just get in the mix. And, it was cute. Rob Pody, I don't think he's on today. Like, my dad used to work with his uncle. And so every once in a while was like, how's Pody doing? How's Pody doing? And one year you all had NEOA, I think at a Bridgeport Holiday Inn. And my parents came to that. And I think that's when I really got my bona fides, because it turned out my parents knew some of the people from the old school days of early NEOA. And so I say all that to say, while I might not have been first gen low income, like you said about the previous student, there were haves nots and have a littles. I say about myself and my brother, we are what happens when low income first generation students get a chance. My parents were both of a TRIO background. My mom came up from the South. Her family was in agriculture, and then they worked in factories, and they asked her made her go to college. And she ultimately ended up with an associate's degree because it was a bargain. My grandparents said, if you go to college, we'll buy you a car. And so she just wanted to be a secretary. So she got through enough to get her associates and become a secretary. My dad was, after high school, kind of a laborer, like many of his friends. And one of the supervisors took notice of him and said, you're a smart guy. You can do something else. And if you stay here, you're going to be here for 30 years. And so my dad took a risk and quit that job to go to school part-time and also work a desk job at an office at what we call, I guess, the Baby Bells before they broke up, SNET, back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, a lot of his contemporaries are still doing that work, 30 years later. And, by the time I graduated from, I guess, 8th grade, my dad had gone on to get his master's degree, all by doing part-time school. And again, while I wasn't in TRIO, my brother and I weren't eligible. The state of Connecticut took Upward Bound as a model and created the CONCAP program, so the Connecticut College Access Program. And it had slightly different eligibility criteria. I believe they allowed students who were at academic risk to participate, and also some allowances for students with disabilities. And my brother did have some challenges in the classroom. He did have a learning disability. And so they admitted him into their teacher prep program in high school. And so today, my brother is a high school social studies teacher in Northern Virginia. So I say all of that to say the work that's being done in TRIO and across the country in programs like TRIO is yielding dividends. And I'm grateful to be able to feed that back into our community. What I'd like to talk about right now, and I'm really happy to entertain questions throughout, is to talk about what COE is doing. Monica gave us the history of where we've been. I'd like to talk a little bit about where we're going as we get ready to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the national organization. What are some of the benchmarks we're looking towards and some of the new initiatives we're putting into place? So first, I would be remiss if I did not put in a plug for my beloved policy seminar. Mark your calendars. As of now, we are still planning for it to be in person in Washington, DC, March 21st through 24th to 2021. Last year, we had to pivot very quickly to turn it into a digital event. We are hopeful, we're watching very carefully, and will certainly abide by the guidelines issued by the District of Columbia. But we are hopeful to be able to gather in Washington, regardless of the outcome of the presidential election. There will certainly be a new Congress, and we have every indication that the Higher Education Act is going to be the first piece of legislation on deck. And they're eager to get that done. And there are a lot of challenges facing TRIO. If you've been paying attention at all to any of the alerts coming out of the council, you'll know that because of the success we've had over the last decade in getting increased appropriations, there's been a desire by advocates of other groups to use TRIO as a vehicle to get students in other types of groups services. And so we'll definitely be defending what we've built up and trying to move forward to make sure that what we fought for all these years doesn't get diluted. Mm-hmm. And so for those of you who haven't been to the policy seminar, it's a dynamic opportunity. And many, many individuals have said to me that it's the first time they really get to see what the work we're doing means, because you're with, quote unquote, the true believers. These are the folks who, I mean, because a lot of it, you have to find additional resources outside of your grant to come to pay for parts of it. And you hear from members of Congress, you get to ask hard-hitting questions to COE staff, you get to meet congressional aides. The picture on the lower left, the gentleman on the farmost left corner is actually a new member of our team. He's our new Vice President for Public Policy, Jonathan Elkin. That's a picture from when he was back on the Hill and was one of our guest speakers. And you get to go and advocate in real time for your programs and for your students at a time when they're making critical decisions about TRIO funding and, again, the Higher Education Act. Also next year, again, we're planning to be in person for our 40th annual conference in September 2021. It will be in Atlanta, Georgia, which, again, given the civil rights history of TRIO, it's fitting to be celebrating in that city. And so we're supremely excited about that. And we're already beginning to plan for that event. Additionally, in the last few years, the council has begun sponsoring different events designed to really elevate our students and our professionals. First, of course, I hope many of you are planning to participate in the First Generation College Celebration. It actually will kick off on, it's always November 8th, which is the anniversary of the Higher Education Act, the original signing back in 1965. This year, that's a Sunday. And so to that extent, many institutions we found are planning a week of activities. And so we partner with NASPA, the student aid professionals, to do a series of activities around November 8th. We actually, at the end of this week, will be hosting a student social, I think on Thursday evening, and then on Friday, a more reserved formal program featuring COE's president, Maureen Hoyler, as well as the leadership of the NASPA First Generation Center. And so certainly I can share information about registering for those events if you're interested. Also, over the last few years, we've actually taken a page from your book. Many of our regional associations host what you call emerging leaders institutes to really help raise the next generation of leaders of your associations. We have begun to partner with different institutions, primarily Princeton. They were our first partner to do two things. One, really help our state leaders prepare not just for their year of service, but leadership more broadly, but then also to give exposure from these high-ranking universities, many of which are dying to have the students that we serve come to their campuses, and not just the straight out of high school students, but even as transfers. Many schools, Yale, Princeton, et cetera, are accepting non-traditional students as transfers. And they want them, but they find that there's often a disconnect in the recruiting. And so for the past 3 years, we've worked with Princeton, Cornell, and Yale to host an Executive Leadership Institute, whereby we get to host leadership workshops and engage cohorts of incoming president-elects of our state chapters to prepare them for their year of service and beyond. And at the same time, those campuses have the opportunity to showcase what they can offer low-income and first-generation students. This past year, we were scheduled to be back at Princeton, but because of the COVID challenges, we are having to delay until next year. But we also, besides Princeton, have another university on deck for the following year. I don't know if I'm allowed to release the name of that university, but we do have a number of high-ranking universities lined up. And so we're really excited that this initiative continues to grow and is bearing fruit. Many of you already know this. If nothing else, you know that COE is continually working to help our professionals grow their skills so you can give the students everything that they need. And so there's ongoing support as far as technical assistance, compliance, legislation, regulations training. We just wrapped up the proposal writing workshops for EOC and talent search. There'll be another one, I believe, 2 weeks after the grants, the final grants are released. And we're not entirely sure when that will be. We have some ideas, some guesses, but we're not entirely sure. But certainly we know that that's a hallmark of what you all look to us to provide. Additionally, we have communities of practice. They've been rather dormant and unoccupied, but as a result of our virtual meeting at the end of September, we had online meetings where a lot of people came and showed up and expressed interest in coming to our communities of practice, which are around the topics of STEM, research evaluation and data, international access, and then a invitation-only state leadership community practice. And so we do want people to take advantage of that resource as a place to discuss with your peers, you know, all of these topics. We want it to be a protected, safe environment to share and collaborate. And so please, you know, consider using those resources. And you log in at community.coenet.us. It's the same login information you would use if you were registering for a workshop or a conference. One thing we're really proud of at COE, we have a research arm known as the Pell Institute for the Study of Opportunity in Higher Education. And for the last 5-6 years, they have produced what's become a hallmark research piece known as the equity indicators of higher education. And it really looks at how has equity changed or not changed over time. Yeah. And it looks, every year they look at slightly different criteria, but particularly it says what's happened to low-income students, to students of color, to students who rely on federal aid programs, who's going to college and why. And it uses historical trend data, it uses state-by-state data. These are tremendous resources for you as you're preparing for your grant writing to show need and things of that nature. Very recently, we've been going to the National Press Club to formally release the report. We've actually been involving students to illuminate the data. So when we say, okay, students have difficulty completing their degrees, and here are the reasons why. We've actually had students give testimony as to these are all the barriers that I faced on the way to degree completion. So we're very excited about the work of the Pell Institute, and we're already beginning to talk about next year's product and how it might incorporate what we've learned through the COVID-19 crisis. Another thing that people I don't think know that we do, but we're extraordinarily proud of, is that we work very hard at COE to give opportunities to TRIO students that they might not otherwise have. We recognize that so often students who are in TRIO don't get the opportunity to feel like students. They feel like workers, employees who happen to be going to school. But we want them to have the same access, not just to the classroom, but to the opportunities outside the classroom, because as they move into the workforce, that's really what will distinguish them from others who are trying to compete in what's a more competitive workforce every day. And so we have programs that provide internships in Washington, DC, paid internships in Washington, DC. We have opportunities for them to study abroad. For our high school set, we have our National Student Leadership Congress that brings them to DC to stay on a college campus for a week, to meet other students from across the country, to do a model Congress. Now, I will admit this last year, we had to do it virtual, and we're looking at 2021 and considering whether we have to be virtual for that. But just the same, we want to have our students have just as much access and opportunity as their middle class and higher class peers. Because we know that ultimately our students are the future. One thing that's been very troubling, and we always knew this, but the pandemic has really pulled the veil back on this. The inequities in our society, you know, there's a really great risk that an entire generation of students could be lost. So many folks reported to us when the pandemic first started that because parents were losing jobs and being laid off and things of that nature, that their children were being asked to step up and assume more responsibility. So they were picking up additional shifts at the gas station, at the grocery store, if they were doing any food delivery. And so we saw students dropping out or stopping out. And so we have to do everything possible to make sure our students stay the course, especially when there are so many competing demands. A lot of students change their plans about, well, I was going to go away, but what's the point now if this campus is closed? But the beauty is that we know from the past experience what our students can accomplish. And I love to look at some of our alumni who are in Congress as examples of that. Of course, you know, one of our favorite examples is Gwen Moore, who was an early student of our President Emeritus Arnold Mitchum at Marquette University in the Student Support Services program. She now sits in Congress, and she's actually a member of one of the most powerful committees in Congress, the Ways and Means Committee. And the thing that people know about Ways and Means is that they come up with a tax law. What they don't realize is that they also govern over all of the laws that dictate what we would consider the social safety net. And that's why Congresswoman Moore was so adamant about being a member of that committee. And you'll see from the quote, she says, as a former recipient of these services, I can honestly say that the overwhelming majority of TANF recipients are hardworking Americans who are down on their luck and just want an opportunity to better their lives and those of their family through work and access to education. She made a deliberate choice and attempt to become a member of this committee because she knew that they needed someone on that committee who knew what it was like to have food stamps and need food stamps. And so we're so proud of her, and we know that there are others with her, Congresswoman Omar, Congressman Horsford, and after today, there may be more TRIO alumni in Congress. We have 2 in Georgia who are on the ballot, Reverend Raphael Warnock, who's running for the Senate in Georgia, and I guess State Senator Nikema Williams, who's running for the 5th District of Georgia, the seat that was vacated by the unfortunate passing by John Lewis. They are both TRIO alumni, and we're very proud of all of them, all of our students, of course. But you can see this is just one arena where the fruits of your labor are coming to bear. And so with that, I think I will stop talking and I guess see if we want to chit chat. Have any questions?
We had one question come through that I just want to surface real quick. Would the other initiatives that you mentioned be added to the current TRIO programs, or is the plan to develop entirely new projects?
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. Would the initiatives that you mentioned be added to current TRIO programs, or is the plan to develop entirely new projects?
Which initiative?
They don't specify. Would the person that'd like to ask a question either unmute themselves or provide more detail in the chat? Let's see here.
So Chris, I think that relates to when Kim was speaking about watering, maybe there'd be some watering down, and we really have to focus on keeping our strength. And but it sounds like there's some other people that have some ideas of things that need to happen.
Okay, so so they're talking about potential initiatives out of Congress.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about kind of how Monica talked about in the beginning, how TRIO criteria for eligibility was kind of all over the place. That's sort of what's happening. People want to add different elements for TRIO eligibility.
Oh, so like, yeah, so we would change maybe. Yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Nothing else has come in through the chat.
So, okay, then.
I have a question. Could I?
Sure.
So it's a bit of a question and maybe an observation as well, but something that I've observed. So in the state of Massachusetts, where I'm from, Gear Up is housed through the Department of Higher Ed. And I feel like Gear Up gets way more press than TRIO, and I'm envious. You know, they're housed at the Department of Higher Ed. They have a data sharing agreement with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. They get named in the state, equity agenda as an initiative. And even in my own institution, I feel like in proposals and things, TRIO doesn't get recognized in the way that they should. And at the Department of Higher Ed, the Deputy Secretary of Academic Affairs is a TRIO alum. So, I feel like because the block grant, the Gear Up money comes through block grant to the state, it gets on people's radar. So I have radar envy, I guess. Is there anything that can be done about that? Or any observations and comments about that?
So I don't know. I'm not an expert on Gear Up. I do know by design, it's not surprising that those things are happening. One, the grants are much larger, and there's a lot more flexibility with what can be done with them. Because nobody likes nitpicky rules and regs, which TRIO's full of those things. So that's one reason. Also, I'm not sure of the nature of the grant, but if it's being administered by the State Department of Ed, then of course they're going to toot their own horn about, look what we're doing, we're so great. And again, there's not as much red tape as with TRIO, so that makes it just easier to promote. And I don't say any of this to disparage Gear. I'm just, talking about the politics of it. I think what would be helpful, and this is not easy to do, it's not hard to do, but you have to be deliberate about it. I think whether it's you and the other TRIO people at your institution, whether it's MEOA, there has to be a deliberate strategy around PR of TRIO. And I think, like you mentioned, how there's an administrator who's an alum, I think it's thinking about, okay, we want to raise our profile. What are some ways that we can do that? What are the different levers we can pull? And coming up with a plan of action, because it won't, quote unquote, just happen. And And so just coming up with, for lack of a better word, a strategic plan around how you'd want to make that happen. What are the different things? So for instance, this is happening next week, so it might be too soon, but First Generation Celebration Day is coming up. That's an event where you could highlight some of your graduates. But just looking at different trio days coming up, you know, get that administrator as a speaker. So there are definitely ways to do it, but it has to be very deliberate.
All right, so I should get more involved in MEOA after I write the
Absolutely.
grant and after I do the APA.
Yes, yeah, do your grants first. Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Looks like no other questions have come in through the chat. So I think just for the sake of time, we will move forward to the next speaker. Thank you.
So Chris, are you gonna put up the slide or?
Yep.
Oh, wait, now I lost you. Okay, excellent. So thank you, Monica, for sharing our history with us, and Kim for catching us up to date and, you know, giving us a little glimpse out there into the future, and for making time to be here today. It's just so special. And, you know, I'm thinking about like the dedication that it takes to get to, you know, what Monica was talking about, how dedicated we have been. And then we arrive at today, all in the name of, you know, equal access and equal rights. And we've done so well, and we have so far to go. And I also feel like today there's no better company that I could be in than the company of Trio and Gear Up. And so just thank you. Hello, everyone in the room. My name's Marti Kingsley. I am a VSAC outreach counselor who serves the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And one of the things that I've lately, in my contribution to this Zoom, I'll try to go as fast as I can, is I've been concerned about the transition from that, it's called post-secondary. So degree completion, I've got my badge, I got my Bachelor of Arts, my Bachelor of Science. Now I'm going out into this world of work. And that's the transition that has me, we work so hard, college, you know, access to help people with SAT fee waivers, to help people identify career interests, to help people access, you know, pay for applications, and then to decide like this is the best fit for me. And then they're in this Title IV institution, and I think we're right there. We're coaching them up the whole time. We're coaching people up, and then there's this, I have this degree now. And then I'm curious about the now what. And so that bridge, and I'd invite each of you to think about that bridge when you finished your bachelor's degree and what that was like in your first year when you finished that degree. And the reason I'm interested about it, because for me, it was unpatterned. And that brought up lots of other noticings and wonderings for me. Like maybe it was easy for you and it was just smooth. Maybe you did an internship that you stayed with. So I just want to get you to think about these things for a second. And when I guess the first thing is I'm wondering now about the 2020 graduates. They just graduated. Now they're out, and Kim mentioned it. It's like, yeah, the employment opportunities are a little like fuzzy right now. And so how are they doing accessing employment? I wonder about, you know, when we move away from our college town and we go back to our hometown. In my case, that's very rural, right? And so I left a college town. There were multiple opportunities. And I believe students did this during COVID because most of us were just sent back home. And now I'm back home in my remote rural environment with fewer employment opportunities. I'm wondering about that. I'm wondering about networking. And this was really neat because COE has a Trio alumni network that I signed up for. It's like, wow, I didn't even know it, you know, so I'm telling people about that and coaching them about that. The reason I wonder about our networking is because when we're first gen, you know, our parents might not have all those connections that the second gen parent has. And those do oftentimes lead to work. And so that goes back to my question. What was that transition like for you? What resources were in place for you? I wonder about that first job and who's reminding us that we are worthy of a well-paying job and also the benefits that would come along with that. Who's reminding our TRIO students of that today? And so in my slide, you can see if you get that first job, it's great. It's like, we need that job. And then you get that job. But if you start underpaid at the beginning, then the research shows that 10 years later, you're still on that trajectory. So then I wonder about student loan repayment. So if I take the first job and I don't take a job that's well paying enough, and now suddenly I'm trying to pay for my rent, my car, all my, my food, trying to balance my budget, and now I have a student loan payment. And I just wonder about all the post-secondary barriers. So that's my new language, post-secondary. I wonder about all those out there and who's helping navigate them. I know we are. But I believe we need to pull other people into that. And I guess the last thing I wonder about, was there one person that once you completed that bachelor's degree, who said something to you that was a difference maker? It's like, yeah, I can do this. I can apply for that job. I've got this, and I can ask for a livable wage. And we were hoping to have some time to hear a little bit about who those people were in Monica's life, but it's looking like that will be another Zoom. But also when I look at this Zoom room here today, and I see my former students as colleagues, that's sort of what Kim was referencing, So we have TRIO students now that are working inside TRIO, and that warms my heart inside VSAC. And I'm guessing that those students, and I know there's many of us who have that same situation where we've been in it long enough where our students are now our colleagues. But I'm guessing that those new TRIO professionals had somebody say something to them like, you can be an outreach counselor, you could be a TRIO counselor, you could be a Gear Up counselor. So I'm just hoping that we keep feeding that going forward. And, I guess in all, it's like every day, it's a chance to make a difference. We are making a difference. Every interaction is a chance to make a difference. And so I just appreciate everybody here. And I guess I'm going to transition now because I don't want to run over. I'd like to introduce you to the director of the Vermont EOC project, Mary Lynn Tacharchikoff. Mary Lynn's been with VSAC for 18 years. She's served in Talent Search, Gear Up, and EOC. She's been with us as the project director of EOC for 4.5 years. She's the creator of the very Zoom room that we're sitting in right now. I think she got a little nervous, like in June, we might not hit our numbers. And so she got creative with her, she's very creative. And so her creativity brought these Zoom rooms. And Monica may have mentioned it earlier, but some of the topics that we've had a weekly Zoom room since July, every Tuesday, and it's had excellent participation. It's increased my referrals, so I know it's happened for everybody. We brought in partners, and our partners created the referrals. We brought in participants, and then our participants created contacts, and that was a major help to us. And it will serve us, going right through this grant year too, I'm sure. But some of the topics were about career exploration, financial aid, loan default, veteran services, CARES Act funds that exist currently in Vermont, serving foster youth in Vermont, educational resources for new Americans, and they will continue. So I think that we're very grateful to Mary Lynn for her leadership and this can-do attitude that she brings to things. Definitely, works for somebody like me who has a lot of energy. And I think this Zoom room on election day just speaks volumes to her leadership. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Mary Lynn.
Thank you, Marty. So Oh, thank you, Chris. Perfect. So my name is Mary Lynn, and it is wonderful to have all of you joining us today. As this slide indicates, our EOC is celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, and we have enrolled approximately 60,000 adults in our project since 1991. And a few weeks ago, I began a countdown to the election, planning really specific activities to, try to breathe and keep myself grounded. This Zoom seemed like the perfect culmination of the 15 weeks of all the EOC Zoom rooms that we have been doing that Marty just described. And to bring all of our TRIO and Gear Up family together from across New England and DC so we could learn together and be empowered for whatever tomorrow brings. So I keep talking about the silver linings that are in COVID, but who would have ever imagined having Kim Jones with us on election day and so many other colleagues to hear the important lessons and have it recorded. So just thank you all again, and thank you, Monica, for sharing this history. She has been in so many different venues over the years, but obviously this is the first time over Zoom, and Monica has indicated that this is her last year, and she gave me permission to use this Zoom platform to recognize her years of service. So now could you give the next slide, Chris? During her presentation, Monica hinted at a few of her career highlights, but I'm just going to review them again. She has been serving first-generation modest income Vermonters in TRIO communities for her entire career since 1976. She started at the University of Vermont in the SSS program 44 years ago, then directed the Upward Bound program at Lyndon State before joining the Talent Search program at VSAC in 1983. Monica's commitment to ending poverty for Vermonters of all ages and backgrounds. Next slide. Particularly the refugee and former refugees and immigrants that she has mentored in Chittenden County has made her a successful lead counselor for the EOC project since 1991. Monica grew up in Vermont and was a first-generation college student. She finds meaningful ways to honor the accomplishments of her participants and their families. Next slide. This often includes inviting participants to share their stories with legislators, attending commencements, and taking recent graduates out to lunch to celebrate their successes. Because of her caring, Monica looks for ways of connecting with participants and their families with resources they need above and beyond her EOC work. Next slide. As past president of NEOA, she shares her advocacy skills and personal connection to the work every year at the Vermont State House, at state and regional conferences by offering workshops. She was recognized in 1999 with the Jack Anderson Distinguished Service Award by VSAC, and in 2014 for the Marion Belgrave Howard Award by NEOA. Next slide, please. When Monica is not helping adults achieve their future goals, she is probably spending time with her 3 children, her grandsons, and extended family, perhaps at her camp. Despite COVID, she continues to be active with the UU community, working with UU Racial Justice Community Committee and mapping out future road trip adventures. Fingers crossed. We would like to just say happy almost birthday. Round of applause. Tomorrow is Monica's birthday, and thank you so much, Monica, for your 44 years of service to TRIO and to Vermonters. We are forever in gratitude to you. Sorry for rushing. So, Marty, is there? I know we've gone over time.
Yes, we have. We've done great. And I didn't know if there were any final questions for Kim, because, you know, Kim, I of course have 1,000 questions. I'm wondering about Second Chance Pell, only because I'm on a committee that's doing Second Chance Pell. And I wonder, like, the Betsy DeVos did an opening thing in great support of Second Chance Pell. But I heard a reference to Betsy DeVos earlier here, and I'm kind of confused, like where she stands with TRIO.
Oh, you know, this is true of any administration. It doesn't really matter who's in the White House. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't. It's really the Congress. It's the Congress, the Congress, the Congress. I mean, the White House and the administration matter to the extent that whatever party is affiliated with them will tend to follow their lead. But this particular administration has been so unusual that, with respect to TRIO at least, and many other programs, the Republicans have gone their own way because it's been so unusual. I think there's tremendous support in Congress amongst the Democrats for Second Chance Pell. If, as predicted, the Democrats take the Senate, Second Chance Pell will most definitely, you'll see it in the next reiteration of the Higher Education Act.
Oh, very cool. Thank you. Thank you. And Monica, you know, we don't have time, and but I think it would be great if you could share, was there one person that kind of like set you on this 44-year trek? Because it's pretty impressive.
I like the younger picture better, but anyway. Well, there we go. That's what it used to look like. So the person that I remember, you know, like all the children in my family, there were 6 of us, all went to college. I'm the only one who went to graduate school. And that was really made possible because I worked at the University of Vermont in Student Support Service, and it was free. I mean, that made such a difference, you know, the fact that I could do it for free. But in that experience, I was in a program that's called Higher Education and Student Affairs now. And I had a teacher and an advisor, and he had written the original, he had written a student support service grant for UVM. And when it was approved, UVM wouldn't support its present on their campus. And so that program ended up being the student support service program at Johnson. So he had written that proposal, but when UVM didn't have those students, supposedly, the program went to Johnson. And of course, a few years later, UVM had the students, so they did have a successful proposal. But anyway, what he said to me when I was in school, and I actually worked in student support services, as I said, but he said, you could be a director of a program like this. And I was like, really? You know, I mean, so I think that so I did. I applied for the Upward Bound, was newly funded at Lyndon State in 1980. I applied for that job and I was hired, and that really, you know, began my journey. And of course, there were other people along the way, but I think it was his belief in me, and you know, and he died during those 3 years that I was at Lyndon. He had terminal cancer, and I remember driving from the Northeast Kingdom to say goodbye, really, to visit him in hospice at his house and to thank him for that. And so, yeah, I would attribute it to his encouragement to start with. Thank you.
Well, that's great. And I bet you we all probably have a little story like that. And I can only imagine how many people you've inspired in the same way. So, I mean, it's just a pleasure. I'm glad we got to at least acknowledge you somewhat today. You're just, you know, like I have you up here. It's, you know, I've watched you ever since I stepped foot inside VSAC, and it's just, you know, just learning even more from you today. And the history is valuable for us to hear. So I don't know if anybody has any kind of concluding thoughts. I know we've held you over, and I think we're all probably a bit nervous if we got to get to the polls or get to the television or what, but are there any concluding thoughts from anyone?
I just want to say, Monica, we're not going to let you go quietly into the night. I will be emailing you after this to get your personal contact info. As I mentioned, COE's turning 40 next year, so we are going to be doing some archiving and capturing of memories, and so I definitely want to tap your brain for your wealth of wisdom.
Thanks, Kim.
And we're always recruiting our retirees for mentorship opportunities for our younger TRIO professionals. So
I'm going to need something to do, certainly.
Well, all right. I think, you know, in the interest of time, I just thank everybody for attending, and keep your eyes out for future Zoom rooms.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks, everyone.
thanks for inviting me.